So there you are, you're 11 years old. At that point, how much, when your mother tells you that, and you discover that there's this big secret you can't share with people, you've written an entire book about your mother's experience, and it's wonderful. But what's your experience? What's that like to have that dropped on you at 11 years old?
Well, first, I wasn't quite sure what the atomic bomb was. And we know we didn't have internet or Google, so I couldn't look it up and kind of see what it was. And I remember just the way that my mother said it, the way that she cried, just giving me the basics of just saying that that's what happened. She was never one to show a lot of tears. So to see her do that when she was talking to me frightened me, because I thought, well, this is really upsetting to her. And if her nightmares are happening because of those, my first remembrance of her having a nightmare was 5, and she had this blood curdling scream that just woke me up from my sleep. And I remember that still so vividly. And she just told me, oh, it's a bad dream, don't worry about it. And I didn't think too much of it. But then when I'm 11 and I'm thinking something that she saw made her scream like that. And I was afraid. I was afraid. I was sad. And then I wanted to know more. And I was kind of upset that she wouldn't do it, but I had to respect that. Now, looking back at my 11-year-old self, I think also my mother went through a lot of PTSD symptoms, which, they didn't really diagnose when she was going through it first as a teenager, and they didn't really talk about it much when I was young. And so she had these bouts of depression, these weeks where she would just want to stay in her room. I never understood that, or she would be quick to be angry over something. And I just had to react to those because I didn't know what was going on. And so as I look at it now, I think I was in the midst of watching her go through all of that, and I didn't know how to process it. So my only way was to just, okay, I will forget about it for a while. And I really did. I didn't want to look up anymore. I didn't know how to deal with that. So when I was probably, I think it was like 13 or 14, when we did go over Hiroshima, and that was really when I wanted to know more about it. And after I started reading that, I remember feeling even worse. And I couldn't understand why she wouldn't want to talk about it, because when I thought it would make her feel better, but I had to respect what she kept telling me is don't tell anyone. And I have to say that it made things very difficult for me. And I was so glad when she finally did talk to me about it, because I knew how hard it was for her to do that, and to think that she lived with that inside of her, all that time being afraid to talk about it, is what really touched me. And so I really, my 11-year-old self took it very hard in many different ways, between feeling sad, being scared, not quite knowing exactly what that meant. I tried to ask my dad a little bit, but he wouldn't talk about it. He is not Japanese. He is a white American. But he knew bits and pieces that my mother may have told him, but she didn't tell him very much either. So it was more or less being told every August to walk on eggshells. You don't want to upset your mother because this is a bad time for her. So you just kind of have to, be very careful of what you do. It was a very tough month to see what she went through, but also because I knew if I did something, one least little thing wrong, it could set her off, whether she'd be very depressed, whether she'd be angry. So it was not an easy road to do. I just did it at the time, but as I'm going through and I'm looking back, it's been, it makes sense to me more now of seeing what she went through, and why I reacted the way I did, and not pestering her with a lot of questions,
I'm talking to you now as an adult. You've written an entire novel, and you've had some time. I don't know that you can process the unfathomable, but you've had some time, I would think, to get some perspective. But at 11 years old, I know your mother had affected an accent from Tokyo, so people wouldn't know where she'd come from. She'd cut herself out of old family photos. Was there a sense of betrayal, resentment? Did any of that come into play, or a questioning of who you are, if there's something this big has been hidden from you up to that point in your life?
Well, I think part of it is I wish that I would have known more at that point. But I think, growing up, it wasn't just the idea of, excuse me, of what she went through with Hiroshima. There was a lot of issues between my parents. And so I think I had to deal so much with their their marital issues, that it was hard for me to really focus on any of that. And so I look back at that, And what really comes to mind is as I'm researching my second book, and I'm talking about her PTSD symptoms and the stuff that she went through, it's bringing up a lot of what I did when I was a child or a teenager. And this is when I'm starting to realize how much it did affect me, that you think you put things, like pat them down so they're not there, but then all of a sudden something will jar your memory, and it does totally bring back. And the feeling of being afraid of hurting her feelings or getting her angry. And then that kind of makes me angry, because I'm like, I wish you would have just said what happened so that we could help each other. You know, I mean, she eventually did, but I think the childhood might have been a teensy bit easier if I understood that it wasn't me that she was upset at, you know, and that's kind of how I felt. So it was very hard to kind of deal with that, but that's kind of another tangent.
I know you said your daughter is planning to continue this work. She's going to continue spreading the message beyond. So that's 3 generations working, and potentially a 4th eventually that will continue to spread this message. How have you modified, based on your experience, how have you explained this to her and talk, because it's a rough thing to tell anybody, but especially to tell somebody 11, 12, which of course you're going around the country and doing that on a regular basis. So how do you break the news to your daughter without also imparting some sense of despair? How do you approach that subject with her and prepare her? And then how also do you go about discussing this with the young people that you go out and you talk with?
Okay, so the first part, I remember talking to Sarah first before I was going to go to her class, because I really didn't discuss it that much with her. She knew my mom was in Hiroshima growing up, but we didn't really talk much more about it. And so I told her what my mother had told me. And I think it's hard because I get emotional when I get to certain parts of it. And because my mother would get so emotional. And I think it was a little tough for my daughter to see that at first, you know, to see that kind of emotion, and to think of her grandma who, you know, at this point in time, we were in North Carolina, but prior to that, we lived in Rhode Island. And so we were very close to my parents. My daughter saw them almost every other day. And when I was sick, she spent a lot of time with them too. So she had this other version of her grandma, you know, who was loving and doting. And then she found out that there was this other side that was so much pain for her. And I think it was very hard for her to handle it. But being able to talk about it more so with me back and forth than what I had an opportunity to do with my mom, I think it helped some as well. She could also see that my mom, you know, she came through it, you know, and by that point she was in her 70s. But she also had her own issues with me being sick. So I think that put a different layer for her, because she was dealing with my physical illness and what went with that, knowing that the illness I had something to do with the atomic bombing. And so how much it affects the various generations, so to speak, either, you know, mentally or physically. But I have to say she's very strong. She was very helpful with me with the book and reading it. And I got her opinion on, you know, you're around 12, 13. Does this make sense to you with this, you know? And when she finished reading it, she said to me, I cried when I read the last 2 chapters, and I don't normally do that, but you made me cry. And she says, and I don't think it was just because I knew it was grandma. It was just because the whole situation. So she said, if you can bring half of that out, you know, with other people, then they're going to understand this a lot more. And that was very encouraging for me. And she has been, throughout this, someone who continues to talk about my mom's story, even if I'm not with her, which is amazing. You know, in college, she was in the Japan club. She minored in Japanese. So she'll be the one that can read it and speak it. I cannot do either. I only know a few choice phrases and numbers, but she spearheaded a lot of things at her school to get the word out. We did a peace tree that with Green Legacy Hiroshima, part of the United Nations. And what they do is they grow saplings from the seeds of A-bomb trees that survived. And we were able to plant a sapling at UNC Wilmington because my daughter got involved, and then her Japanese professor, so that we could plant it and dedicate it there to make North Carolina the 7th state in the US to actually have one of these peace trees. And I feel that even though I wasn't physically there, she's spreading the message, and we're able to now, we've got a tree that she was part of that also has a plaque that describes what it's for, and it will continue. So when I talk with students, a lot of times they have read the book, but if they haven't, and even afterwards, I also try to start off with the history and the culture, and then I kind of come into it more about what happened that day. And it's really hard, I guess, to kind of prepare them for it. I think I just let my emotions be what they are, and I think they kind of speak for me instead of me saying something all the time. And when I will describe an event that my mother went through, I'll read from the book. It's interesting because you'll have a group of middle schoolers or high schoolers, and I've had like maybe 100 once we could be in person in an auditorium, and nobody is talking. Everything is so quiet, especially after I finish, and I wonder if, what I've done to them. And what they'll end up saying is that they took it in and it really meant something to them. And some of them will have tears, and then I feel bad, but I've had students tell me, don't, because we understand this better now. We had no idea before. And to feel this, they'll come up and my mother was alive when I was starting to speak about it, and they would say, thank her for us, for being so brave to tell this story. Because at that age, a lot of a middle school, it's hard to be brave. You got a lot of stuff that's happening in middle school that's not always so great. And to know that something like that stuck with them, it really touches me. And, my mom was very brave to let her story be told, and she trusted myself and my daughter, with her memories of this, something that she didn't trust very many people with. And so I really feel that her strength, it emboldens me to want to make sure that other people can hear about it. And it really touches my heart when students will say that after I've finished speaking, how much it's changed their point of view on certain things. I'll get letters later that they'll say that they've heard, whether it be at their dinner table or at school when there was something going on with another country, they might say, we could just usually nuke them. And she said, I actually stopped and I talked to them about what that really meant, and that it wasn't like a game. And that was so meaningful to me. And I feel like if you reach one person with that, I'm going to get choked up. So being able to share that and to know that students are understanding it and getting the message from all of that means a lot to me. And I can kind of continue my mother's, she called us the 3 Ishikawa women. Ishikawa was her maiden name. And I hope that, she can really see what we've been doing for her. She always felt it was for her papa. And she never quite understood I was doing it to honor her also. And as a case in point for this, in November of 2014, I received my publishing contract. So I remember showing it to my mother. So she took the contract and she put it next to that photo. And she said, well, now he can know how you can honor him. And she said, I never knew why I was still alive when I lost everyone and everything. And she said, but it was to have you. I can't tell my story, but you will do it for me. And that just, it means so much to me that I could do that for her.
Okay, I'm gonna